the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and prenatal education. How consciousness, emotion, and relationship shape a human life before birth. Ladies and gentlemen, when we speak about prenatal education in modern society, the conversation is usually brief, practical, and somewhat shallow. We say things like, try to stay calm during pregnancy, listen to classical music, speak kindly to the baby. All of this sounds reasonable, and yet from a deeper philosophical and psychological perspective, it barely scratches the surface. What I would like to explore with you today is something far more radical, a view that challenges our most basic assumptions about life, consciousness, and when human development truly begins. This lecture is not simply about emotional well-being during pregnancy. It is about what kind of world a human being first encounters, and how that world silently imprints itself on the mind long before birth. At the center of this discussion stands an ancient text, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, known in Tibetan as Bardo Thodo. Although this text is widely known in the West as a guide for the dying, its deeper message is not about death at all. It is about continuity, the continuity of consciousness, emotion, habit, and relational patterns as life moves from one form to another. Consciousness does not begin at birth. According to Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, a human being does not begin as a blank slate. Consciousness, in this view, does not suddenly appear at birth, nor does it vanish at death. Rather, it flows. It carries with it tendencies, emotional residues, habitual reactions, and deeply ingrained patterns formed across previous experiences. In the Tibetan understanding, after death, consciousness enters an intermediate state known as the bardo. During this period, traditionally described as lasting up to 49 days, consciousness remains vividly aware, emotionally sensitive, and highly reactive. It perceives, it remembers, it desires, it fears. Eventually, drawn by karmic affinity, emotional resonance, and relational conditions, consciousness moves toward a new embodiment. From this perspective, conception is not merely a biological event. It is a meeting point where biological conditions and an already existing stream of consciousness intersect. The fertilized egg is not viewed as an empty vessel. It is understood as a threshold, a doorway through which consciousness enters physical form. This radically reframes prenatal education. It is no longer about teaching something new to a fetus. It is about welcoming an already present mind into a world. It is just beginning to learn how to trust. Prenatal education as the first relationship. In this framework, prenatal education is not the beginning of child rearing. It is the first relationship. Long before language, long before memory, long before deliberate learning, the fetus is immersed in a living environment of emotion, rhythm, tension, and connection. The mother's emotional state, the father's tone of voice, the quality of the marital relationship, and the atmosphere of the household do not merely surround the fetus, they teach it. They teach the fetus what kind of world this is. Is the world tense or spacious? Predictable or chaotic? Hostile or welcoming? Safe or threatening? Tibetan Buddhism teaches that what we commonly call the self is not a fixed entity. It is not an isolated core. Rather, it is a dynamic pattern formed through relationships, environments, emotional climates, and repeated states of mind. The fetus, therefore, is not passively waiting to become human. It is actively organizing its inner world in response to the relational field it inhabits. This is what makes prenatal education such a profound, ethical, and philosophical responsibility. Emotion as vibration, ancient insight, modern science. Tibetan Buddhism often describes emotional influence in terms of vibration or resonance. From this viewpoint, emotions are not abstract mental events. They are energetic patterns that ripple outward and shape experience. Modern medicine and neuroscience, although using very different language, describe the same process. Stress hormones, heart rate variability, breathing patterns, muscle, tension, and blood flow all change in response to emotional states, and all of these changes directly affect the fetus. Let us consider one of the most well-documented mechanisms, cortisol, the primary stress hormone. When a pregnant woman experiences fear, pressure, or prolonged anxiety, her adrenal system releases cortisol into the bloodstream. Research has clearly shown that cortisol crosses the placental barrier and enters the fetal circulation. This means that the fetus is not merely near the mother's stress, it is chemically immersed in. Repeated exposure to elevated cortisol levels influences the development of the fetal brain, particularly the stress regulation system known as the HPA axis. Over time, the fetus may physiologically learn a simple but powerful lesson. The world is dangerous. Stay alert. From the Tibetan perspective, this is described as emotional, imprinting the mother's unresolved fear, leaving a subtle but lasting trace on the consciousness entering life. The rhythm of the heart as emotional language. Beyond hormones, there is rhythm. From early in pregnancy, the fetus is surrounded by sound and vibration. Among all these signals, one rhythm is constant: the mother's heartbeat. As pregnancy progresses, the fetus becomes increasingly sensitive to changes in cardiac rhythm, transmitted through blood flow and uterine vibration. A sudden spike in heart rate caused by shock or fear produces a sharp, chaotic rhythm within the womb. Calm, steady breathing produces a slow, predictable cadence. To the fetus, these rhythms function as emotional language. They communicate urgency or safety, agitation, or peace. When calm rhythms dominate the prenatal environment, the fetal nervous system gradually organizes itself around stability and regulation. When chaotic rhythms dominate, the developing nervous system adapts to vigilance and hyperarousal. Breath, the silent teacher of safety. Breathing patterns provide yet another channel of communication. Shallow, rapid breathing associated with anxiety alters oxygen exchange, blood flow, and muscular tension. Deep, slow breathing increases oxygen delivery and stabilizes physiological rhythms. For the fetus, the mother's breath becomes a biological signal, indicating whether the environment is safe enough to relax or dangerous enough to remain alert. In Tibetan contemplative traditions, breath has always been understood as the bridge between mind and body. Modern science now confirms this insight. Breath is not only respiration, it is regulation. The womb as emotional architecture. Finally, we must consider muscular tension, particularly in the uterus itself. Emotional stress activates the sympathetic nervous system, leading to subtle but persistent uterine contraction. From the fetal perspective, this translates into pressure, restriction, and instability of space. Repeated exposure to such conditions can shape a basic expectation. The world is tight, space is limited, relaxation is unsafe. Conversely, when the mother experiences emotional safety, warmth, and support, uterine tone remains soft and adaptive, allowing the fetus to experience spaciousness and ease. The core message, what emerges from both Tibetan philosophy and modern science, is a shared conclusion. Life does not begin with cognition. It begins with relationship. Before a child learns language, values, or beliefs, it learns atmosphere. Before it understands meaning, it absorbs rhythm. Before it knows love as a concept, it experiences it as regulation or its absence. Prenatal education, therefore, is not about perfection. It is not about constant positivity or extraordinary effort. It is about how we relate to the present moment. One calm breath. One gentle word. One moment of kindness between partners. One act of patience toward oneself. To a fetus, these are not small things. They are the first definition of reality. And this is why the Tibetan tradition insists that life begins in mind, and that mind begins in relationship. This is the deeper meaning of prenatal education, not as a technique, but as an ethical stance toward life itself. From emotional imprints to the architecture of temperament, how a mother's inner world becomes a child's first reality. In the previous part of this lecture, we arrived at a fundamental conclusion shared by both Tibetan contemplative traditions and modern neuroscience. Life does not begin with thought. It begins with relationship, rhythm, and regulation. Before a child ever learns language, morality, or identity, it learns something far more basic: what the world feels like. Now, let us take the next step. If emotional states truly shape the fetal nervous system, then we must ask a deeper and more unsettling question. What kinds of emotional worlds are we actually transmitting to unborn children? And just as importantly, are all emotions transmitted in the same way, or do different emotional states shape different kinds of temperaments? To explore this, we will move from theory to lived experience. When the mother is calm, the womb is a spacious world. Let us begin not with distress, but with ease. When a mother feels calm, content, or gently joyful, her body enters a state of parasympathetic dominance. Muscles soften, breathing deepens, blood flow becomes smooth and rhythmic. The uterus, rather than tightening, gently expands and relaxes. Consider everyday moments: a warm bath at the end of the day, listening to music that evokes comfort, feeling emotionally supported, receiving affection, or simply breathing deeply and slowly. In these moments, the womb becomes a spacious environment. The fetus experiences a sense of openness rather than constriction, soft, consistent pressure rather than sudden compression, stable rhythms rather than erratic pulses. Neurologically, this establishes what we might call a gentle baseline. The developing nervous system learns that calm is the default state of reality. From the Tibetan perspective, this is described as a stable and harmonious field of vibration. From the scientific perspective, it is optimal autonomic regulation. Different languages, same phenomenon. Vibration and physiology, two descriptions of one reality. Tibetan Buddhism describes emotions as waves or vibrations that permeate the body and environment. Modern medicine describes emotions as hormonal cascade, neural firing patterns, heart rate variability, breathing rhythm, and muscular tone. At first glance, these explanations appear worlds apart. Yet compare the following statements. A Tibetan formulation: when the mother's mind trembles, the child's world trembles. A medical formulation: maternal emotional states are transmitted to the fetus through hormonal, cardiovascular, respiratory, and muscular pathways. These are not competing explanations. They are complementary descriptions of the same process. The fetus does not hear emotion. The fetus feels emotion through the body, and what is felt repeatedly becomes structure. One core message, many pathways. All four mechanisms we have discussed: stress hormones, heart rhythm, breathing patterns, and uterine tension, point to a single conclusion. The fetus is not passively waiting to be born. It is actively learning the emotional grammar of life. These lessons do not remain abstract. They become embedded in physiology, temperament, and stress response patterns. This is why emotional self-regulation during pregnancy is not merely self-care. It is neurodevelopmental architecture. This insight unites Tibetan prenatal practice and modern obstetrics around a shared truth. The calmer the mother's inner world, the calmer the child's first experience of reality. A common question from parents. At this point, many people ask, is emotion really transmitted so directly? Does this mean a child's personality is already determined in the womb? These are reasonable concerns. Tibetan contemplative traditions have observed these processes for centuries. Modern medicine has only recently begun to confirm them through empirical research. What both traditions agree on is this: prenatal influence does not determine destiny. It biases probability. It shapes the strategies a nervous system adopts to survive, adapt, and relate. Let us now examine how specific emotional patterns tend to shape specific temperamental tendencies, using both philosophical insight and concrete examples. Why emotion has such direct impact. The Tibetan explanation is simple. Emotion is energy in motion. Whatever moves through the mother's body moves through the fetus as well. Modern science provides detail. Stress hormones cross the placenta. Heart rhythms alter uterine blood flow. Breathing changes oxygen delivery. Muscle tension alters spatial pressure. Together, these forces shape how the fetal brain organizes itself. Let us examine these pathways through lived scenarios. Stress hormones, learning threat before birth. Imagine a pregnant woman experiencing intense stress at work. During a meeting, she feels publicly criticized. Her chest tightens. Her thoughts race. Within moments, cortisol surges through her bloodstream. This cortisol does not stop at her body. It passes through the placenta and enters the fetal circulation. Inside the fetus, heart rate accelerates, stress response circuits become more sensitive, and the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, becomes more reactive. In Tibetan terms, the mother's fear shakes the child's inner world. In scientific terms, the fetal brain adapts to a high-threat environment. Heart rhythm, feeling danger without language. Now imagine the mother being suddenly startled. A car braking sharply, an elevator jolting unexpectedly. Her heart rate spikes. That rhythm travels through blood flow and uterine vibration. The fetus does not understand the event, but rhythm requires no interpretation. Irregular, rapid beats communicate urgency. The body learns before the mind ever will. Breath-teaching safety or uncertainty. When anxiety arises, breathing becomes shallow and rapid. This subtly alters oxygen exchange and abdominal pressure. Amniotic fluid shifts. The fetus's entire body feels the change. There are no words, only sensation. Repeated shallow breathing teaches the fetus. The environment is unstable. Deep, slow breathing teaches. There is time, there is space. Uterine tension when the world feels tight. Stress often produces unconscious abdominal contraction. Consider moments of tension, anticipating conflict, driving in traffic, engaging in heated arguments. The uterus tightens slightly, space narrows. To the fetus, this becomes a felt sense of pressure. Repeated exposure imprints a primitive belief. The world presses in on me. Emotional patterns and emerging temperament. Let us now consider how distinct emotional climates tend to shape distinct temperamental adaptations. 1. Chronic anxiety, the avoidant or hypervigilant strategy. When maternal anxiety is persistent, constant worry, rumination, or anticipatory fear, the fetus experiences continuous micro-instability. The developing nervous system learns. Detect danger early, hesitate before acting. Later in life, this may manifest as avoidant tendencies, social caution, difficulty embracing novelty. This is not a flaw. It is a survival strategy learned early. 2. Chronic anger, the defensive or reactive strategy. When anger dominates, raised voices, frequent irritation, sudden outbursts, the fetus perceives unpredictability. Adrenaline rises. The uterus tightens. The fetal nervous system prepares for impact. Later, this may express as defensiveness, reactivity, or oppositional behavior. Again, this is adaptation, not pathology. 3. Emotional withdrawal or depression, the constricted strategy. When maternal energy is low, long periods of sadness, numbness, or emotional withdrawal. The womb feels dim and quiet. The fetus adapts by conserving energy. Later, this may manifest as withdrawal, low initiative, difficulty engaging with stimulation. Stability, learning the world's rhythm. Now we turn to one of the most powerful protective factors, maternal stability. A stable emotional environment offers the fetus something invaluable: predictable rhythm. A mother with emotional regulation tends to show steady heart rate, deep breathing, low muscular tension. The womb becomes a rhythmic, reliable environment. The fetus learns this world has order. This produces better emotional regulation, greater optimism, more secure attachment patterns later in life. Love, the most potent signal of all. Finally, we arrive at the most powerful influence of all: love. In Tibetan tradition, this is called metta, or loving kindness. Love is not merely an emotion. It is a state of coherence. When a mother feels loved and loving, her breathing warms and lengthens. Her body relaxes deeply. Her heart rhythm becomes smooth. The womb becomes a field of warmth. Moments such as a partner's gentle touch, whispering to the unborn child, feeling gratitude or connection. These moments transmit the most fundamental message of all: you are welcome. A fetus bathed in this signal develops a deep, implicit belief: the world is safe. Existence is justified. Connection is possible. This belief becomes the psychological soil from which self-esteem, trust, and relational ease grow. The final integration across anxiety and calm, anger and love. One truth becomes unmistakable: the mother's emotional world does not merely influence the fetus. It becomes the fetus's first world. Tibetan wisdom says, the mother's mind leaves traces in the child's consciousness. Modern science says, maternal neurobiology shapes fetal brain development. Different words, same truth. The fetus learns the rhythm of life before it ever opens its eyes. And that rhythm becomes the seed of temperament, a seed that will shape a lifetime. From the mother's rhythm to the parent's world. Why the father, the relationship, and the home complete the child's first universe. In the previous part of this lecture, we reached a quiet but decisive conclusion. The fetus learns the rhythm of the world before it ever learns its language, and that rhythm becomes the seed of temperament. But at this point, a crucial question naturally arises. If the mother's emotional state shapes the child's first experience of reality, then what shapes the mother's emotional state most powerfully? The Tibetan tradition gives a clear and unapologetic answer: the father's role, the emotional climate setter. In Tibetan Buddhism, prenatal education is never an individual task. It is relational at its core. The tradition places extraordinary importance on the harmony between husband and wife, and the reason is remarkably simple. The person who most directly influences the mother's emotional stability is the father. A father, tone of voice, attentiveness, sense of responsibility, and emotional presence all exert a disproportionate influence on the mother's nervous system. When the mother feels supported, respected, and emotionally safe, her body settles into equilibrium. And when the mother is settled, the fetus learns a stable worldview. In this way, marital harmony sends a silent but powerful message to the unborn child. The world is coherent. The world is not hostile. Relationships are safe. From the Tibetan perspective, this is not symbolic. It is literal. The emotional field created by the parents becomes the child's first universe. Tibetan prenatal practice: structured, not sentimental. Many modern prenatal practices in the West focus on mood enhancement or emotional expression. Tibetan prenatal traditions, by contrast, are surprisingly structured and methodical. They do not aim to create constant happiness. They aim to create stability, clarity, and coherence. Let us examine 4 foundational Tibetan prenatal meditation practices and their modern psychological significance. 1. Light visualization, establishing safety at the core. The most well-known Tibetan prenatal meditation involves visualization. The mother sits comfortably, closes her eyes, and imagines a soft golden light surrounding the fetus. She silently repeats phrases such as, "You are safe. You are loved. You are welcome here." In Tibetan understanding, this light represents protection, clarity, and life force. In modern psychological terms, visualization has a measurable effect. It slows breathing, stabilizes heart rate, reduces stress hormones, and improves uterine blood flow. In both frameworks, the result is the same. The fetus receives repeated signals of safety and trust. 2. Maintaining a clear and harmonious environment. Tibetan culture places great emphasis on environmental energy, what they call vibration. The belief is simple. The fetus absorbs the emotional and sensory quality of its surroundings. Thus, they recommend clean, uncluttered spaces, gentle lighting, simplicity rather than excess, natural elements such as plants, incense, and soft sounds. These are not aesthetic preferences. They are psychological interventions. Such environments communicate to the fetus, this is a safe world to enter. 3. Compassion meditation. Metta. Stabilizing the emotional foundation. In this practice, the mother regularly extends compassion toward her partner, family, neighbors, animals, and ultimately, all beings. Tibetan tradition holds that when compassion becomes habitual, the emotional baseline of the womb becomes extraordinarily stable. Modern psychology echoes this insight. Compassion-focused practices reduce anxiety, regulate emotion, and enhance attachment security. The fetus develops within an emotional field that is neither tense nor defensive, but open. 4. Breath meditation, the first rhythm of life. Although simple abdominal breathing is common in many cultures, Tibetan tradition frames it in a striking way. The mother's breathing rhythm becomes the fetus's first template for emotional regulation. Deep, slow breathing teaches the nervous system that there is time and space. Erratic breathing teaches urgency. The fetus learns regulation not through instruction, but through immersion. How Tibetan practice handles negative emotions. A critical distinction must be made here. Tibetan prenatal education does not demand emotional perfection. Pregnancy does not exempt anyone from fear, anger, or sadness. What the tradition strongly discourages is self-condemnation. The guiding principle is this: when negative emotion arises, do not apologize to the child first. First, understand and soothe your own heart. Why? Because self-blame creates a second layer of anxiety, and that anxiety too is transmitted. Tibetan prenatal practice is, at its core, a process of healing the mother. 5 core capacities the fetus learns. At the intersection of Tibetan insight and modern developmental psychology, we find 5 foundational capacities formed before birth. 1. Basic trust, the foundation of lifelong attachment patterns, shaped primarily by the parent's relationship. 2. Emotional regulation, learned directly from the mother's breathing and heart rhythms. 3. Worldview, the mother's perception of life becomes the child's first model of reality. 4. Reciprocity, when parents speak to the fetus, neural circuits for communication and relational pleasure begin forming. 5. Sensory integration. Music, natural sounds, and parental voices organize the fetal sensory system. What the fetus actually feels. Tibetan tradition describes the fetus as a deeply sensitive being. Modern neurophysiology confirms this view. The fetus responds to the mother's heartbeat, her voice, music, the father's voice, maternal stress, the volume and tone of arguments, walking speed, emotional atmosphere. This is no longer spiritual speculation. It is measurable biology. What the fetus wants most: safety and welcome. Tibetan Buddhism identifies 2 core needs of the unborn child. First, safety. Consciousness enters the body from a vulnerable transitional state. Signals of safety are therefore intensely sought. Second, welcome. The fetus senses whether it is wanted or resented. Modern attachment theory reaches the same conclusion. Prenatal emotional climate influences attachment patterns after birth. Conflict, the greatest prenatal harm. Both Tibetan tradition and modern science agree on one point with striking clarity. Persistent parental conflict is the most damaging prenatal influence. Arguments increase cortisol. They sensitize the amygdala, They establish fear-based emotional patterns. They destabilize attachment systems. In Tibetan understanding, sound itself is vibration. The vibration of conflict teaches the fetus. The world is dangerous. Core prenatal prohibitions, traditional and modern. The tradition warns against intense rage, chronic marital conflict, excessive noise, emotional neglect, or apathy. Each transmits a distorted image of reality. A 4-week practical program. Week 1, breath meditation, light visualization, gentle music, basic compassion practice. Week 2, strengthening emotional connection with the partner, walking meditation, natural sound immersion. Week 3, environmental cleansing, scent and candle meditation, deep relaxation. Week 4, speaking directly to the fetus, wishing for the child's future happiness, joint couple meditation. Ancient wisdom meets modern science. Remarkably, the Tibetan Book of the Dead aligns closely with contemporary research. The fetus perceives emotional vibration. Stress hormones cross the placenta. Auditory memory develops after 20 weeks. Maternal depression correlates with insecure attachment. Parental conflict elevates fetal cortisol. Ancient wisdom and modern science meet at the same truth. The final synthesis. Prenatal education is not about creating a child. It is about welcoming an already present consciousness. The essence of Tibetan prenatal philosophy is simple. The fetus is already aware, and the parents' minds become the child's first world. Music, nutrition, and exercise matter, but more fundamental still is the quality of the parents' inner lives. To give a child a good world, parents must first live in one. How we approach prenatal education does not merely shape one child's personality. It shapes the emotional quality of the next generation. As the Tibetan Book of the Dead reminds us, life is not a series of disconnected events, but a single river through which consciousness flows. The emotions parents generate today become the first waters of that river, and tending to those waters with clarity, compassion, and steadiness may be the most precise form of love we can offer the future. Thank you for listening. May your days be calm, your hearts be gentle, and may that light reach the child who is listening long before birth. If this exploration of prenatal consciousness and Tibetan wisdom resonated with you, your subscription and support allow this conversation to continue for future parents and for future lives. Thank you, and I will see you in the next lecture.